Hello and welcome to season 6 of Raw Chatter. Yes, this is a solo episode for episode 2. I hope you did enjoy last week's episode with Yolanda Brooks. Please do check it out because I think a lot of you will find what she has to say really, really empowering, and you may just be interested in jumping on her writing course that's starting in October. So, for those of you who don't know me, hi, welcome to Raw Chatter. This is where we uncover and unfilter the way that we speak about issues that affect all of us to some degree. I also invite people to share their stories of recovery, either from addictions or illnesses, and reinvention. Now, today, what I'm sharing with you is something that crops up. So I work with one-to-one clients right across the board, all ages, all sexes, and all creeds, colours, cultures, religions, whatever, because addiction is not picky, and neither is the topic that I am going to be talking about today. So I'm going to be talking about ADHD, and specifically ADHD along with RSD, which I'll explain in a second, and burnout. And I think it's about time we all really understood just what do these terms mean in terms of how do they actually affect people on a practical basis, whether it's you've got a parent who has ADHD, whether you yourself have it, or whether you are working in an environment and you don't really understand just what it means. Whichever one of those boxes you tick, you're going to learn something from this episode. And this is very much, well, I'm hoping that it's going to be an opportunity for you to really understand just how challenging both ADHD addiction and what burnout actually is, and how it can look and feel for a lot of people who don't necessarily realize that that is what they are struggling with. So if you've ever been called flaky or too sensitive or too much or too lazy, and maybe you've even told yourself that you are those things, then this is for you. Because here's the thing. Laziness is not a weakness, especially if you've got ADHD, rejection sensitivity, or burnout. Now, I decided to actually do my training to become an ADHD coach because it kept cropping up time and time again. A lot of the clients that I work with will tell you when they first start working with me, you kind of get loads of questionnaires to fill in. And one of those questionnaires that looks at your brain function. And it's quite a detailed questionnaire, but it tells me whether there are things that I need to look out for. For example, is it likely when I then go and have a look at that person's personal health and event history, in other words, their whole life history, am I going to see that perhaps they've played a lot of sport where there may have been bangs on the head, or I'm going to ask them, depending on what the brain function questionnaire that they've answered shows me, whether they may remember being concussed, or whether they did kind of fall a lot, or whether they were ever dropped as a baby. Why? Because I can see from those forms if that's potentially the case. And I can also see how they answer those forms if there's a possibility or a likelihood that they are struggling with some form of neurodiversity. And so this was cropping up more and more often with people, particularly it started with people with bulimia and alcohol addiction. And this is where I recognized that I needed to really understand, not just on a kind of a surface level or a little bit deeper than that. I needed to properly understand just how ADHD affects people, the way that they think, just exactly what RSD is. And I know I keep saying them 3 letters and you may be going, what is this RSD that she's talking about? RSD stands for Rejection Sensitivity Dysphoria. And for anybody with ADHD, it is huge. And it basically means that you do anything, you will say anything, you will make decisions and choices to avoid feeling in any way, shape or form rejected or disliked or dismissed or not wanted. And it's huge. and I'll get to that a little bit later on. But what I discovered was a lot of what we call the kind of the socially acceptable addictions. What do I mean by those? Well, alcohol, drinking alcohol, right? It's socially accepted that everybody does it. Same with smoking. Now, I know that's changed a lot, but vaping's kind of taken over, equally as addictive and definitely probably more damaging when it comes to how it affects our lungs and other things. But that's for another podcast. But also things like eating disorders, which are not the norm, but are kind of accepted in society, and also things like depression and anxiety. Right? And so I saw that the ADHD was coming up more and more often. Hence, I decided to go deep into understanding it. And so what I first of all want to help you to do as a listener is to just understand, first of all, ADHD. We know now that there are a lot of people, and particularly women, where a diagnosis has been missed. And do you actually need to get an official diagnosis to suspect that your brain may be working slightly differently to other people's? Personally, no, I don't think you do. I think you know yourself. Now, if you are of school age, then potentially, yes, you do need to have an official diagnosis, because a lot of schools won't offer any support or help until you do. And if you want to go down the road of getting medication, then unfortunately you also do need to get an official diagnosis. But I'm sure that there are a lot of people listening who will be able to resonate with some of the things that I'm saying. Now, I am not here to diagnose you, and I don't want you to run away and go, oh, I've listened to Vicky's podcast, and I am definitely, right? Because either which way, whether you have a label, whether you don't, whether you have an official diagnosis or not, if you are struggling, then there is something in here for you. So let's look at what are the common day-to-day traits, if you like, that somebody with ADHD has to contend with. Well, one of the very common things is that somebody with ADHD will forget the question that you just asked them, literally, even if you only asked it a few seconds ago. They will struggle to be on time no matter how much they prepare or how hard they try. Often they are early, but for them to be able to be early, you don't see in the background just how much work and effort has gone into that. Very often they struggle to follow a conversation if there's stuff going on in the background. Now, by stuff, I mean, it could be anything. It could be a radio that's just playing in the background. It could be a TV program that's on. It could just be an awful lot of noise that is really distracting. And so if you're speaking to somebody with ADHD and do you think, well, I've just asked them that, why are they taking so long to answer? It's potentially because they can't remember what the question is, or they gave you a different answer because they're trying to kind of guess what was the question. And also, if you're having a conversation and you feel like they're not fully with you, it's probably because they're not, because there's too much going on in the background that is so distracting that they cannot fully focus on what you have to say. And it's really important that we don't just dismiss this as people being rude or stupid, because these are terms that used to be thrown around decades ago, but unfortunately people still think those words. And even the person who is struggling with ADHD, especially if you don't know that you have it, you're going to start going, well, what is wrong with me? Am I stupid? Right? Why can other people do it? Why can't I? Well, the answer is your brain is just working in a different way. One of the things that they also struggle with is being distracted very easily. So they will start a task and then break off for a thought that's popped into their head. And then they'll run with that thought and they'll just lose the thread. Very, very often, and this comes up multiple times, and it's very frustrating. Often it's put down to menopause because we know that we tend to get forgetful. But misplacing everyday objects like your phone, like your car keys or your house keys or your handbag, right? Just genuinely just like not being able to remember where you put them. It's very, very classic. Getting hijacked by your own thoughts. And this is one of the things that is really difficult, because somebody who has a neurodiverse brain does struggle for it to ever seem to be quiet and for it to ever switch off. And it gets really, really distracting. And what often happens is when that person has made a decision, there's a multitude of thoughts that come in very, very quickly, one after the other, that then literally hijack that decision, and then the thoughts can go in various different directions. And this is often where people will find that they've just literally frozen and not done anything, because they've just kind of been hijacked by their own brain and not knowing what to do or where to go. It's not easy. It's really challenging, especially in the workplace when you're expected to be a certain way. And one of the other big things that comes up is procrastination, right up until the last minute. And this is partly to do with the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, because this fear of making a decision, because in case it's wrong, in case it upsets somebody, in case the other person may think that I am stupid or lazy or whatever it happens to be. And then they can literally, so if they've been taken for ages to make a decision, and then suddenly they're going to go straight into like hyper focus, where they just can't think of anything else, and they're just literally focused on this one thing and one thing only. Now, we can turn all of these things into positives, but I can tell you that the people that I work with don't necessarily have the ability to see them that way when they feel like they are disrupting their life. And living this way is exhausting. It uses so much energy for your brain to be working in this way, for you to never ever feel like you can switch off, even for a nanosecond. And these are not character flaws at all. This is the way that an ADHD brain works. And without the right support, these patterns will spiral into coping strategies that do real damage. And I mean by that, to try and help you to feel like for a second that you can have a breather and just numb out. Well, that may be when you turn to alcohol or when you turn to food, because you're looking for both a dopamine hit, which you're going to get from both of those. And I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the dopamine pathways and receptors and blah, blah, blah. But somebody with ADHD just needs to have dopamine on a regular basis. What I try and do is help people to make decisions and create ways of being where we can help them to have that slow dopamine release, but they're still going to need more of it than a lot of people. And often this is why they turn to food, alcohol, gambling, or other drugs, recreational or medicinal, because they're getting that dopamine hit. In other words, it works. So of course they want to keep doing it until it starts to cause some serious problems. But the other thing that they do a lot of is about this RSD, this rejection sensitivity. And these are the patterns, this belief that we have to make other people feel a certain way so that they will like us, so that we will not be rejected. And this is not an ego thing. This is because their nervous system is on high alert, ready and waiting for rejection. And it's not about being dramatic, but it does mean that they get themselves into more of a pickle where life becomes more stressful, because they tend to say yes when they want to say no, because they want to avoid disappointing somebody, because disappointment feels very unsafe. And don't forget, as humans, we want to feel safe and we want to feel secure. Because if we feel safe and we feel secure, we're unlikely to be under threat. And as you know from previous podcast episodes, threat equals death. So if something feels safe, if them thinking, even just thinking that they might have disappointed somebody, that's going to make them feel unsafe, then it's easier for them to just say yes, even if deep down they want to say no. They also will not necessarily tell the truth about how they feel or what they think, just in case the reaction is that of somebody rolling their eyes or making a huffing sound, or if they get laughed at or dismissed. And chances are that that has happened to them potentially more than once in the past. And so they're terrified of that again, which is often why they're not honest. And this is the challenge, because when you're not honest with yourself, it's really hard then to know, who am I and what actually is the truth. And then that makes procrastination more likely, because you're not sure anymore what is a good decision, a bad decision, what do you really want. And it becomes such a challenge to even do the simplest, or what somebody who's not neurodiverse would class as the simplest of things, which is why it's exhausting, which brings us on to why people get burnout. But I'm just going to also mention a few more things that people do, because rejection sensitivity dysphoria is so powerful. It turns people into people pleasers, but it also lays them wide open to be the perfect partners for somebody who is a narcissist, because they are easy prey, because they're constantly worrying about what you think, and they're trying to please you and do the right thing. And they will play conversations over and over and over again in their head, trying to think what they could have done differently, what they could have said differently, what you may think of them if you say this. And sometimes it's conversations that haven't happened yet. And sometimes it's conversations that already have happened, and they're beating themselves up about why they didn't say it differently or what they could have done differently. They can also feel massively judgmental of themselves about the way that they look. Because if the way that they look isn't pleasing, or there's a fear that you might not like them because they're too fat, or they're too, I don't know, too brash in the colours of clothing that they choose, or that their nail polish isn't right for you, or that their hairstyle is old-fashioned. In other words, they will judge themselves incredibly harshly. Now, all humans do. We all judge ourselves harshly. But somebody with ADHD, this rejection sensitivity dysphoria, means that you can kind of 10x the amount of harsh judgment and criticism that somebody with ADHD or neurodiverse issues tends to lay upon themselves. And they can be crushed, I mean, literally crushed by the tiniest of comments that you, as the person coming out with it, has absolutely no clue that was derogatory. It wasn't meant to be in any way, shape or form, but it gets taken as being a criticism or a dismissal, or that they've done something wrong, or that you don't like them. And that's the same for feedback. And why am I telling you this stuff? Well, because if you are somebody who is in a work environment, and you're a manager or a leader, and you're not understanding how somebody with neurodiverse issues is going to take, for example, your feedback, or that they're struggling to concentrate or be on time for things because they're in an open plan office and it's just like they cannot function properly. You need to be aware of this stuff, because the more we can help people to work best, and that is what I'm all about. You can see that on my name label, it says I am a human health optimizer. I absolutely am. I want to help people to optimize their health as humans. That's what it means. And a lot of the time we are treating humans as robots, and we are not. We are people with emotions and feelings and brains and bodies that work slightly differently. We are not all the same. And when you understand how to help other humans work to the best of their ability, in other words, to optimize themselves, then we're all going to feel and function better and happier over time. So this is why it's important. The other thing that you will find is that people with ADHD and other neurodiverse issues will often over-explain, over-analyze, and over-apologize. And instead of them saying, I'm sorry, they will repeat it, and they'll explain why, and then they'll say sorry again. And often it's sorry is the start of a conversation and the end of a conversation, because they're permanently sorry. It's like, I'm ashamed, and I'm kind of apologizing for my very existence. And that is how it feels for them a lot of the time. Now, that is a really challenging way to live. And what I help people to do is to accept that they have this thing, this way that their brain is working that's different. They didn't ask for it. It just, we have to accept, and we have to understand just how it comes out in us so that we can learn to manage it better and recognize that our thoughts are not facts. Our thoughts are not true. Our thoughts are signals, and our thoughts are going to usually be combined with some kind of feeling, some physical sensation within our body. And we've got to recognize that all of those things are energy. They're energy in motion. That's what emotions are. And feelings will pass. There are feelings that really do not feel fabulous at all. They feel really shitty. And there are other feelings that feel great. And all of us as humans want to feel those great feelings. Of course we do. But we can't appreciate those great feelings unless we have a lot of the shitty ones. And so we've got to recognize you're never going to be happy clappy. We're not meant to be. But we're supposed to also help ourselves to recognize that these are feelings that feel really, really good, and feelings that feel not so good, and then feelings that feel shit, right? But they're not good, and they're not bad, and they're not wicked, and they're not evil, and they're not dark, and they're not whatever label you put on them. They are just feelings. They will give you information. They are signals. But other than that, we don't have to act on them, and we don't have to believe that the feelings is who we are. We are not our feelings. We are not our thoughts. They are not our identity. And neither is burnout our identity, and neither is RSD, Rejection Sensitivity Dysphoria, our identity. Neither is autism or ADHD or any other labels that you want to think of. They're not who you are. They're just a name for a thing that society has given it so that we kind of have a clue as to how we can help people to feel and function better. Now, through all that I've explained, I'm sure, well, I hope that you've recognized that it's flipping exhausting. If that is how you are running your life day on day, if you're constantly being late, if you're constantly on hyper alert for feeling a certain way, or for you saying something that might make somebody else feel a certain way, and then you are trying to do your work and you keep losing your keys or your phone, or all of it's just a lot. It's a lot. And this is why burnout in ADHD is so common. And I need to emphasize it is not laziness. So just what do we mean by burnout, and why is it different? Well, ADHD by default means that sleep can be a big struggle, because, and a lot of people experience this, and it's not just people with ADHD, people with who go through menopause will tell you, but also a number of other people too. So it's not exclusively, but the brain will not switch off when you go to sleep. And so often quality sleep, where we get that restorative part of sleep, where your brain can go through the process that it needs to, where the glymphatic system actually cleans the brain from the previous day's debris so that you can kind of start almost afresh, if you like. That doesn't always happen. And it might not happen for multiple nights on the trot, which means that you're already compromised, whether you've got ADHD or not, with how you are going to feel, and definitely how your brain is functioning, because you cannot function really, really well if you've got days and days of debris left in your brain. It's not going to happen. Which means that you get more brain fog. You cannot think straight. And that means that everyday tasks feel even more challenging, even more impossible. But it also means that you feel exhausted often, no matter how much you sleep. Now, I'm describing burnout here, and ADHD burnout particularly. You have absolutely no motivation for the things that you normally really love and that you normally care about. You snap, or you shut down, because it's just all too much. And then you beat yourself up for not being able to keep up with everything. Now, this is when people with ADHD will call themselves lazy. In comes the RSD, criticizing like crazy. You're just lazy. You're just stupid. You're just rubbish. Everybody else can do it. What's the matter with you? But burnout is not laziness. Laziness is not caring. Burnout is caring desperately, but not having the mental or the physical capacity or fuel to keep on going. And this is where ADHD and eating disorders and addiction collide, because bulimia, emotional eating, alcohol, as I already said, smoking, overworking, people pleasing, perfectionism, they all, to some degree, soothe this rejection pain, and they can kind of mask some of the burnout and the overwhelm. They're socially acceptable. So I'll just have another energy drink. I'll just have another coffee. I'll just have a cake or a whatever to keep me just being able to push through and deny, because I'm just lazy. It's not burnout. And this is when you can spiral into depression and into anxiety. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, right? That's why I'm here, and that's why I want to do this. Because when you understand that these traits are classic to some degree, then everybody doesn't have all of them, but if you're listening, I'm certain that you can probably recognize and resonate with a number of what I've shared. And by the way, if you are liking what I am sharing, please do give me a like, hit that subscribe button, and tell your friends if you think this is going to be helpful to them, because I want to help people with practical tools that can make life a little bit easier. And so it's practice, and the more you can repeat it, the more you can practice it as often as you can remember. And here's the challenge with creating new habits when you have a neurodiverse brain, because you forget to do them. But I'm just going to go through a few things that will help. Stop, take a breath, and pause before you say yes. Use short, clear, precise sentences and statements without over-explaining. Now, that takes practice, because your rejection sensitivity dysphoria is going to come in and say, you're being rude, you're being too sharp, you're being whatever. But practice anyway. Remind yourself when you are starting to put in boundaries, especially if you know that you've not done it before and it's brand new, you're going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. Now, you can call it hard. I don't like using that word hard. For anything that is new and unfamiliar, you will feel uncomfortable. It will not sit in alignment with who you currently are, because you are doing or saying stuff that you haven't done previously. That is called normal, right? But the more you repeat it and the more you keep on doing it, regardless of that unfamiliar, uncomfortable sensation that you're going to get, then you'd be surprised how quickly it does actually then become familiar and normal, and you're not worried about it anymore. But you can only find that out by doing it. And you cannot shortcut implementation. We cannot think our way into new habits. We cannot think our way into better thoughts. We have got to actually take action in real life so that we can experience this stuff for ourselves. Grounding your body will really help when you feel that way. You breathe slower. You drop your shoulders. You unclench your hands and your jaw, and you press your feet down into the floor. Just connect yourself to the ground. One of the things that I recommend is that people have somebody who understands the way that their brain does work, and check in for reality. If you're really struggling, whether it's with procrastination or knowing how to say something, or whether what you've said was the right thing, or whether the decision that you've made, have somebody that you can check in with rather than spiraling all on your own. And then practice tiny boundaries. Because if you just can put boundaries in with little things that don't feel too massive, you start to get used to that uncomfortable, unfamiliar sensation just over little small things. And the small things matter. So what do I mean by that? Well, instead of immediately saying yes to something that actually genuinely you really don't want to do because it just doesn't feel good, or you know it's going to take you out of your way, or it's going to cause stress somewhere else, you simply say something like, I'll think about it. I'll get back to you in a couple of days. Those small snippets of putting just a small boundary in place where you haven't done what you've always done in the past and just said yes immediately because it's easy, and then gone away and wondered how on earth you're going to do it, and why did you say yes, and then beating yourself up, and then how are you going to get out of it, and all of that stuff, right? Start putting in these tiny, tiny boundaries. Let me get back to you on that. I need to think about it. This is then allowing you to maybe check in then with somebody else so that you're not left struggling with this on your own. So I'm aiming for around about 30 minutes on these episodes, folks, and time does go so quickly. I do hope you have got something out of this. And if you do, I'd love you to make some comments. But I'm just going to close with this. If you have been living with the words lazy, weak, too sensitive, too much, or not enough, and I just want you to take this away, that is not who you are. It's ADHD, it's rejection sensitivity, and it's probably burnout. Now, once you name it, you can work with it instead of punishing yourself for it. And so if this episode has hit home for you, then by all means, get in touch. Send me a comment, message me on LinkedIn. All of the details are in the show notes. And if you're watching on YouTube, they're in the description. Because what I want you to know is behind every socially acceptable addiction or perfectionist facade, there is often just somebody who is trying to survive. And I am here to help you to not just survive, but to actually enjoy your life and to thrive. So I'm going to leave you with this as I always do. We only have one life as far as we know, and one body. So please look after it, because it is looking after you. And until next time, please do take care of yourself.